Hello and welcome to the big picture. RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan conducted his last monetary policy review today and left all rates untouched. Rajan will be demitting his office on September 4th after a very eventful 3-year term. Rajan was not given an extension, which at least the last 4 governors of RBI have had the benefit of. Rajan's tenure, however, has been extremely interesting. His approach to his job has been different and he has received accolades from across the world. So we will today look at what has been his achievement, his major contributions, and what kind of a legacy is he leaving behind. To discuss this, I have an eminent panel of guests: Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, and also Under Secretary General at the United Nations; CM Vasudev, former Finance Secretary, Government of India; Mohan, Guruswamy, Senior Economist; Renu, Kohli, former staff member, RBI and IMF; and AK Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Desai, we did discuss some time back when he was not given an extension. Today, when you look back, today's economic policy review, which was, did you expect anything different from what has happened?
No, I don't think I was expecting anything different. Basically, he's leaving a reasonably clean slate for his successor to work on. And in terms of his thing, I would say that perhaps I would focus on 3 things, maybe 4. 3. 1.
Well, sorry to interrupt. When you say clean slate, what does it mean?
What I mean is that there isn't any big problem. Like when he came in, you remember there was this whole problem of the tremendous drop in the rupee exchange rate. The inflation rate was running at 9%. There were major problems on the economic. So I'd say that whoever takes over now does not have an immediate monetary policy problem to cope with. That's a sense in which I was saying a clean slate to see. But in terms of his legacy, 3 or 4 things. 1, I think over the past 3 years, the whole monetary policy framework has become much clearer. 4%, Monetary Policy Committee, etc. Now, I'm not entirely in sympathy with that. Let me say that, because I think that's a little too tight for a country like India, where the markets are not fully integrated. We are geographically diverse, all sorts of other things that work. Second, which I think is really a major contribution, is forcing banks to be clear about their non-performing assets instead of hiding them, and having a clear process of transition. And third, which may in the long run prove to be the most interesting, is the way he's opened up the finance sector to new entrants. The 2 new banks, the payment banks, putting bank licenses on tap, the small bank licenses, that he has put. I suspect that in the long run, this will be seen as probably his most valuable achievement, that he has really opened up the finance business in India to new entrants. And there are many other things that one could talk about, but I'll speak on these 3.
We'll come to that. Mr. Vasudev? Mr. Vasudev, how do you look at this? Did you expect anything different today in his last review? And also, how do you look at it? How do you look at his performance?
No, I think his last review, of course, is on very predictable lines, and after all, he was some sort of a lame duck governor, so it is more of a status quo review that he has tabled today. But I think overall, if you look back on his 3 years tenure, I think he is leaving behind a very stable macroeconomic environment. I think the rupee was under so much pressure at that time, it was sliding. People were saying that it's going to cross 70 rupees to $1. The current account deficit was very high, almost touching 3% of the GDP. And there was generally macroeconomic instability, with inflation also running very high. So I think he handled those problems very deftly. He came out with very innovative ways of shoring up our foreign exchange reserves. The bonds that were issued with the Reserve Bank guarantee on the foreign exchange part, taking the foreign exchange risk on the Reserve Bank's books. Though, of course, the bonds which are now maturing, it will put some pressure on the reserves. But the reserves are so well positioned now that I think the system can very easily handle them. So that is his biggest contribution, macroeconomic stability that he brought about, especially when he joined, there was so much of instability. I also agree, I think, with Nitin that the innovation with regard to the banking sector that he has brought about, the new banks and the complete sea change in the bank licensing policy, putting it on tap, new types of banks like payment banks and all being introduced. So he also brought about a great deal of predictability in setting of monetary policy, and all that earlier feeling that suddenly the Reserve Bank would come out with some new policy and all that. He brought about a lot of predictability, and of course with his stature in the international domain, the credibility of the central bank and the policies, I think they got much greater recognition. So these are many plus points, but there are certain areas in which probably he wanted to do more, he could not do more. Maybe I will dwell on those in the second round of discussion.
Okay, sir. Okay. Mohan, how do you look at it?
One little correction, you twice mentioned that he was denied extension. I don't think he sought an extension. He said he's
That's
going.
a different matter.
He had a 3-year term and he's gone.
That's a different
matter. I think...
No, he sought. I think he made it quite clear that he would have been happy if he had got a second
he said
term.
that, I don't think we should really get into that. It's as if, he was denied something. He was
He
not.
was denied.
No,
I mean, I'm sure others would...
I don't think so.
Okay.
But, I think he's going. And he's going on his terms. A tremendous record. For the first time, the country is aware of the RBI governor in a larger sense that, previously they were, generally quiet, low-key governors. And he's come into focus. He's made issues in focus. He's been bold. He's spoken out where he agreed with the government, where he disagreed with the government. For instance, his questions he raised on estimation of GDP, I think are very, very relevant. And he flagged the issues of NPS, which are very relevant. As a matter of fact, Subbarao just the other day gave a statement that he really made a mistake not flagging off NPS because it had begun in his time also, and he had the full 5-year term. And so, rather than flag that off, NPAs are a major problem. Without resolving the NPA issue, we are not going to get very far on private sector investment, even public sector investment, because banks just don't have money to lend,
right,
and everything is coming to halt. I think he flagged all these issues, and reform of banks. He's made that a priority. The government has to deal with that sooner or later.
Okay, Renu, is he the last powerful governor of Reserve Bank of? Is he the last powerful governor of Reserve Bank of India? Because the next governor will have to deal with the monetary policy committee, which will actually decide rates and all these things.
Well, the committee has the potential to evolve in a manner so as to dilute the powers of the governor over time. But let us not forget, for the time being, there is definitely a casting vote that the governor has. And as of the moment, as things stand at present, it is hard to imagine that the 3 RBI members will think any differently. There is not likely to be a conflict. So, in that sense, yes, an answer to your question is yes, but over time, and that's how I would qualify that.
Incidentally, on macroeconomic stability, just a little both he and Arun Jaitley were greatly helped by the fall in oil prices.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
We must not lose sight of that.
What is your assessment?
I think my co-panelists have summed it up really well. I want to add a couple of more points.
I have a question. You please add those points and this question. You think that he was more comfortable during the UPA regime than he was with the NDA regime? How do you compare his performance during these 2 regimes?
Okay. First, what are the key contributions that he made to India's monetary policy or the financial sector governance landscape? One, I think he really took a big, bold step forward in codifying the relationship between the Union Finance Ministry or the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India. And I think he probably have often been accused of having ceded ground to the government. But I think in the larger interest, he has agreed to those terms where the monetary policy framework initially and now the monetary policy committee framework, he has agreed to, in a sense, submit the earlier sovereignty of RBI to a larger structure.
Why do you think he did that?
I'll tell you why. Because if you have a 6-member committee of monetary policy committee, out of which 3 members are appointed by a committee that is headed by the cabinet secretary. Now, that gives you a committee where the RBI has only 3 members who can actually have their say, and the RBI governor has only got a second vote. So, what all he can do is this, that he has to get those 3 people, and then if he cannot get it by consensus, then he has to use a second vote. And the number of times he uses a second vote, and I think the governor will be seen as somebody who is not carrying the committee along with him. So the onus will be on the governor, the next governor, to
find a consensus.
Find a consensus. So I think the second vote is a good way of keeping a check. And my understanding is this: Raghuram Rajan was comfortable with it, although there were many other views that said that governor should not agree to this second vote concept. He should actually have a veto power.
Can I say one reason why he probably agreed with it is that, as you've seen, the whole issue of interest rate policy has always been politically charged.
Right.
In a sense, what this does is that in an environment where this sense of political importance of interest rates will only increase, in India it's only going to increase as the economy urbanizes, industrializes, the setting up a monetary policy committee gives the governor a certain line of protection. ये मैंने नहीं किया है, ये तो हमने committee की advice
Was
पे
that
करे.
protection necessary? Mohan, do you think that protection, that kind of a
Over
protection
time, I
has been
think
necessary?
Can I come to
Yes.
your
He's
question?
not alone.
Can I
He's
come
not
to,
alone. Bank of England did it. It's been done in so many countries. Why?
But Mr. Bhattacharya,
can I
that kind of a
come to that
protection, was
question?
it needed for him?
I think
For an RBI governor?
I think it was not really needed. You know, frankly speaking, what he has agreed to is a good structure. It's a very solid structure. But coming to the second more important point that he did was on the banking licensing arena. Actually, the legacy in the banking licensing arena will be the most important legacy in my view, because what he has done by the final phase of his reform agenda, which is the on-tap licensing, he's actually virtually made the banking licensing this batch-wise licensing, that I am now opening the window for licensing, come one and all and submit your applications, and then I'll consider it.
What will be the what?
Now it is on-tap licensing.
What is going to be the impact? What is going to be the impact?
It is going to say, in a sense, allow people who are eligible to apply for banking licenses anytime they wish. So it is not restricted to one phase that, for next 6 months, the window is open like IIC membership, and it is open, and then you come and apply for it and decide on it. Now it is all open.
It's
anytime,
open
24/7. So I think that's the biggest contribution in a country which is underbanked. I think we need more financial intermediaries. So therefore, I think that's his big contribution in my
Okay, but my question of UPA versus NDA. His tenure during the UPA.
I think Raghuram Rajan has been a very strong governor, and as a strong governor, the fact that whether he was working with the UPA government or the NDA government did not make any difference the way he functioned. I think his statements about issues which did not come under his domain,
directly,
he made them as freely in the UPA as he did it in the NDA. So I don't think he really.
But Ashok, don't you think he had more problems with Chidambaram than with Arun Jaitley?
I think so.
Well, he did have a problem under Jaitley also, as long as there was a different regime in the finance ministry. I think Mr. Jaitley understood Raghuram Rajan's concerns, and he made some changes in the finance ministry hierarchy and the bureaucracy.
That helped them too.
That helped.
Then let me get Renu. Yes, Renu.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this Monetary Policy Committee composition one point. It is not entirely clear. The point was made that 3 members will be appointed by the government. It is not entirely clear as to who will in future appoint the deputy governor, because the submission or the answer to the parliament given by the government as recently as end of July was that the appointment process of the governor, deputy governor and all other regulatory heads will henceforth is by a search committee called the Financial Sector Regulatory Committee. And if that is the case, then the governor so far has had a say in the appointment of the deputy governor. And the composition of the Financial Sector Regulatory Search Committee is not entirely clear right now. But if the case is that both governor and deputy governor too are appointed by a different set of people, then effectively the deputy governor at some point, or at least we would say that there are 4 people on the Monetary Policy Committee who would be not appointees of the governor for sure.
Okay.
So that's,
we will.
that's
Okay.
the point
that
I wanted to add
yeah.
about
Okay.
the
That is
Monetary
that is
Policy
something
Committee,
which.
because the reason
yeah.
why it is important is because
That is we will
yeah,
wait.
the reason why it is important is because at some point in the future we can see a lot of independent views at the Monetary Policy Committee.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Mr.
And
Vasudev.
that
Mr.
would
Vasudev.
sort of certainly influence outcomes.
Yeah.
Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Vasudev, Mr.
Yes.
Vasudev, as far as his legacy is concerned, you have
Yes.
said certain things. Now, as far as this, opening up of the banks are concerned,
Yeah,
how much of these banks will
Correct,
actually be doing the kind of work which needs to be done as far as lending is concerned, or is it all going to become just corporate lenders basically?
No. No. You know, the point is that today almost 70% of banking assets are in public sector banks. So since you are not able to privatize some of these public sector banks, the only way is to inject more competition in the system and gradually chip away at that 70%. So if there are more banks, hopefully the share of the banking assets in the public sector will come down, which already has come down from, say, it used to be 80-85% 10-15 years ago. It is now down to 70%. So maybe more banks will hasten that process. So that is one big sort of benefit that will come to the system. And even otherwise, generally, we are a quite an underbanked country. So the more the banks, the better would be the share of the banking sector in the GDP of the country. But I think the three other points I want to make. One
Yes.
is, of course, this tension between the governor and the finance minister.
Right.
I think there is nothing wrong if on policy issues there is a little bit of tension. After all, there is an interplay of fiscal policy and monetary policy, and finance minister being the purveyor of fiscal policy and the governor being the purveyor of monetary policy, there is bound to be some tension. But as long as the tension is resolved in a reasonable manner, I think it's a good thing. It would not be a very good idea that everybody is on the same page and all that. And we have seen how and governor also has a lot of impact on the fiscal policy, because he has put a lot of pressure that if you want me to loosen the monetary policy a bit, you must put your fiscal house in order, which the government had to do. So it is a two-way traffic, and I don't see there is too much harm in this tension in the system, which is maybe in some ways desirable. But I want to mention a few areas in which I feel Mr. Raghuram Rajan could have done a little more than what he has done. Probably when he joined, I think he was very bold, because the turf issue within RBI is very strong. They are very loath to give up any of their power and authority in the system. There are 2-3 areas. One, of course, is the very sort of micro-regulation of the banking system, too much of interference through the regulatory mechanism. Perhaps the reason being that there are so many public sector banks, and the government has expect the Reserve Bank to exercise many of the ownership responsibilities, and therefore, those micro regulations, they impact the private sector banks also. So he has not been able to, I think, make the regulation of the banking sector light and yet effective. That is one area which I thought he would be able to do. Second big
What are the,
issue
can you excuse me for an interruption here?
Mr. Vasudev, 1 second. I think
just 1 minute.
No, Renu has a question for you. Renu, yes.
No, just.
I was just.
No,
can
I finish my 2-3 points?
Example of the micro regulation versus the light regulation.
Okay, please continue, sir.
Well, there are many areas, I can dwell on that. There are many areas in which the RBI's regulation is very intrusive, things which the boards of the banks should be doing. RBI is telling them what to do. So that's a whole area. But I think there is a general consensus across the banking sector that perhaps the regulation need to be a little more lighter. The second point is the debt management office. I think RBI is wearing so many hats where there is some inherent internal conflict. One had thought that that when Raghuram Rajan came as a governor, probably he will have a little more open approach, not being influenced so much by the turf issues of the RBI. He did start with that, but gradually I think the RBI internal forces, they dug their heels in, and we've got so much delay in setting up of the debt management office.
Okay.
The third area, I think, the bond market. You know, governments, just one very quick point. Government securities have to be the backbone of the debt market. Now, if RBI is insisting all the time that they will issue the securities and they will regulate, why should the government securities not be regulated by SEBI? So here is a turf of the RBI. So when the governor came, he did realize it. I had a chat with him. But then the internal forces of RBI, I think, had a lot of influence, and RBI again dug its heels in that yes, we will issue government securities and we will regulate them. We will not allow SEBI to regulate. So these are some of the issues which I think he could have risen above the turf issues of the RBI and made a bigger impact.
Yes, go
I
on.
have a contrary view to my
Mr.
friend
Vasudev.
Vasudev. I think the problem with the banks is that they've been under-regulated, and you've had this enormous amount of, mismanagement of huge public funds. And it comes out of the situation in India where government is the owner of the 14 big banks in the country. And, so government effectively functions as a regulator, the Ministry of Finance, micromanages the banks to that extent. So the RBI has really been not active in managing the banks, and when the RBI should play the role of regulator, because in other countries, like in America, the government is not the owner of the banks. The regulator performs a different kind of a function. Here, the government is the owner, plus wants to be the regulator. So I think that was a problem, and that has resulted in this big mess. And the RBI, I think, asserted itself in this last 3 years, and by saying that, you have to conform to norms, you have to answer to us, to tell us what you're doing, and therefore, I don't think it was micromanagement. I think it was macromanagement which was needed, which was not exercised before. And
both of you have different points of view, sir.
There's an issue. Let me add to this controversy. If indeed RBI has to be the regulator, first RBI should voluntarily withdraw its directors from the boards of banks. I find it a contradiction that as long as you are a regulator, you can't have your boards members on the nomination of the boards.
I think the problem is having speak like
I want to add one more. Sir, I want to add just one more thing which you can address it also. One of the things which Raghuram Rajan said today in his press conference was that in the last 1.5 years, that from January 2015, 150 basis points have been reduced as far as interest rates are concerned, but it has not been passed on to the consumer, to the customers at all. And if RBI had so much regulation, they should have been able to do it. But he seems very helpless.
No, I think that on that latter point, part of the problem was liquidity management. And one of the reasons why it was not passed on was, but leave that to one side. But to get back to the thing, I think there has always been a problem about the exercise of the public sector banks' ownership functions, not just in RBI, but also here in the government department concern. My hope is that the new bank bureau under Vinod Rai may help to provide a certain barrier to both the excessive political direction, which was there because of the way in which the government exercised some of the functions from Delhi, and equally the sort of the possibility there may have been micromanagement from the RBI side. The second issue, which Vasudev raised, debt management, there has always been a little issue that, in a sense, the RBI is acting like a merchant banker to the government. It is managing the government's borrowing program, so which is what a merchant banker does for anybody. And there could be a clash between that responsibility and its responsibility as a macroeconomic manager of interest rates and so on. So I'd say that, frankly, I would argue
and also the regulator of these securities.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say in the long run, it would probably be in the interests of the RBI to focus its work essentially on what is going to become an increasingly important part of its responsibility, which is macro management. With the Monetary Policy Committee, the government more or less basically delegating inflation control to the RBI. You see the language of the memorandum. It virtually says you are responsible for that. So I would say that down the line, and for that, I was actually hoping that he would have stayed on, because he has the intellectual capacity to be able to work towards this.
Now that is not possible.
That is theoretical now.
Renu, why is he feeling? Why is he looking so helpless? Why is he sounding so helpless when it comes to passing on this interest rate reduction to the customers? So does it mean that the RBI governors need a little more powers to ensure this to happen?
To pass on the interest rate cuts, is that your question?
Yes, that is the question.
That the governor needs more powers to pass on?
Yes.
No, I don't think that the RBI needs more powers, because that was removed a long time ago. There are no interest rates are free, and those were interest rate ceilings and administered interest rates, etc., were done away with a long time ago. So it would be a regressive act. Interest rates are free, and RBI just gives out cues through its policy rate, which the banks are expected to pick up. Why transmission is not taking place? There are problems.
He was saying today that unfortunately
he said today that banks may find
excuses.
No,
that banks may find another excuse. Now they are saying first it was liquidity, and now it is the FCNR redemption. And I'm afraid that when the redemption comes up, is done, then they'll find another excuse.
Right.
Now there is a problem there, and that problem is not new. It's just that it is being discussed much more, because after 1.5 years of RBI's shift in monetary stance, we find that there is no transmission percolating down at the level of the bankers and banks and customers. But let us not forget that the RBI tightened from September 2014 onwards and shifted from WPI to CPI, a consumer price inflation, as its nominal anchor. Banks didn't go up either, which was completely a departure from the past. In the past, banks' behavior in India has been that they are very quick on the upside, that is in raising interest rates following monetary policy tightening, but they are rather reluctant and loath. They move more slowly on the downside. But here we have a situation that the banks did not pick up on the upside, but on the downside, well, I mean, there has been about, as per RBI's communication, about, a little more than 50% of transmission. So there is a problem. I mean, obviously there is a gap between what the policy is and what is the credit demand supply schedule or determination of the interest rates at the level, or cost of funds determination at the level of the banks and customers.
Okay, Renu. Yes, Mohan, very quickly.
The consequence of this, of not able to crack the whip, is that we have the highest spreads for banking in the world. Nowhere in the world you get 7, 8, 9% spreads. You get 2% spread between deposit rate and advance rates. Then you're considered very good. Huge. That means the public is being gouged for this.
Okay, Mr. Bhattacharya, he says that his effort, whatever has been his effort in the last 3 years, the results will come 5-6 years later. Why does he say that? What are these results which we will see 5-6 years later? And finally, you think that his successor will have a tough act to follow?
Well, I think he is right that the results will flow in over a period of time, because I think the changes that he brought about are pretty fundamental, as my co-panelist mentioned. So I think it will be wrong to presume on our part that things will start looking up, or the new structure will start yielding results immediately. But I think these are fundamental changes. Now, coming to your question on whether successor issue, I personally feel that the manner in which his continuation or otherwise was handled, and the manner perhaps even Mr. Raghuram Rajan himself made certain controversial statements which raised or up the ante of the government. My sense is whoever comes and steps into his shoes will have a tough time in adjusting to the new role, wherein the government will always be watchful of whether the new man is stepping outside. So therefore, the new man will have a tough time.
Maybe a rock star is going to be replaced by a bhajan singer.
Okay, I think
so it will be a tough time.
On that note, we'll end a rock star. That's what Rajan was, and he will continue to be remembered as a rock star.
Shobha said he put sex back into sense sex.
His contributions will be known as in the coming weeks and months and years also. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, The Big Picture.